Good morning, everyone here. It's 11 o'clock and we are on a tight timeline, so we'll go ahead and get started. Appreciate you all being here. You'll notice, first of all, that I am not Leah Lommel, so I apologize for that straight out of the gate. My name is Nick Sabato. I'm the director of the Education for Humanity initiative at EdPlus at Arizona State University. We've got an exciting panel today to discuss education for humanity from a number of different perspectives. We have Maggie joining us because we like to make an entrance. Before we get started, just kind of wanted to get a quick temperature of the room as well, given that it's a bit of a palatable crowd here. So if we could just have folks introduce themselves as well. We'll go ahead and introduce ourselves, and I'd like you to introduce yourself so that we can have more of kind of an interactive, fun learning conversation today. So I'll begin by letting the panel introduce themselves, and then we'll turn to the crowd, and then we'll really dive in. So we'll begin with Jacqueline.
Great. Hello, I'm Jacqueline Smith. I'm an Associate Vice President of University Initiatives at ASU. I run a unit that is a startup lab for projects in the university. You heard from our president, Michael Crow, today. So he is always coming up with new ideas and often the starting place for vetting new ideas, identifying new partners, and developing pilots that then incubate and launch. All happens in the Office of University Initiatives, and I'm really fortunate that over the last year, one of those efforts involved using some of our ed tech tools, including the Global Freshman Academy, at a refugee camp in Rwanda. So I look forward to sharing some of that process with you.
Hi, I'm Emet Mohr. I'm the Senior Vice President for Chemonics International's East and Southern Africa Division, as well as I oversee our education and youth practice. And for those of you that don't know, Chemonics is an international development company that works in 70-plus countries. Currently, we have an education portfolio that works in 12 different countries across the globe. And our real focus now is, as we've sort of, with the Millennium Development Goals, increased access to education, we're really working on how do we push on increasing the quality of education, so working with local governments, ministries, other local organizations to improve the quality of education as we've increased access to education.
The latecomer, Maggie Mitchell-Salem, Qatar Foundation International. At QFI, which is part of Qatar Foundation, some of you may know it, it has a number of international campuses, including 5 American campuses in Doha. We work in K-12 education at QFI and are really focused on issues relating to Arabic language and Arab culture, STEAM education, so STEM plus the arts, and youth engagement that connects young people in the Americas, the UK, and Qatar. And if you know anything about the small country of Qatar, it includes a lot of people from other places in the world, so it's pretty international. We've entered this space of looking at displaced learners in large part because of the Syrian refugee crisis and the other crises that are happening in the Middle East, and because of our emphasis on Arabic and learning in Arabic. And you would be forgiven for not knowing that that's actually more challenging than you think, not just because you might be thinking as a foreign language it's challenging. The Arabic language itself, when you're looking at digital online curriculum, you are looking at issues of linguistics that I won't get into, but it's a deep and powerful issue and highly complicated, and there are schools of thought on it that make it even more complicated. So simple translations and engaging kids around Arabic, their mother language, if you're looking at learners in the Middle East and North Africa, is hugely challenging, and it's one that we welcome, and we welcome this discussion to find ways of addressing them.
Good morning. My name is Amanda Antico. I am the founder and CEO of a very small consulting shop in DC called Evolved. I have a couple of different roles. I focus my work on social enterprise, kind of doing well and doing good. And I have a 25-year history in teaching, learning, and technology. So I have been at the forefront of a lot of these products that have been coming to market to and fro for a long time. I've focused internationally for most of that time. Currently, I'm working very closely with Nick and the ASU team as they launch the Global Humanitarian Education Initiative at ASU, which will probably make a huge mark on a space that is very untapped. If you're in this room, you're probably very well aware of the fact that most primary school children in these horrific situations are getting some attention, but that really target spot of 16 to 24 is where we're losing them, where education is probably most needed. So we're working hard to define and strategize our mission here And in addition to that, under Secretary Duncan, I worked very closely on a soft diplomacy project with Muslim majority nations, how I got to hang out with Maggie. We had a lot of fun together. But we did learn the challenges of kind of bringing a world showcase using digital technology, and that was over 8 years ago now. So that conversation of using ed tech effectively to both educate properly towards a goal, right? So the big thing that I think about all the time is not education for education's sake, but what is the off-ramp for these people? If they have to go back to their camp, is it a job? If it's, can they possibly go somewhere else? What should we be looking at as far as data is concerned on where they should be going post-education? So I think it's going to be a rich and wonderful conversation, and we're looking forward to learning more about all of you.
Yeah, so why don't we take like a couple seconds each, stand up, tell your name, organization, just so that we can tailor some of our comments a bit more to the audience.
Of course.
Okay.
I never need a mic.
You do when you're being filmed.
All right, can everybody hear me? Hello? Anybody hear me with this? No. My name's Art Frederick. I'm the Director of Distance Education at Virginia State University, a historically black college in Virginia.
My name is Colin Fredericks. I work at Harvard helping professors make MOOCs.
Fever, the University of Kansas.
I have Tom Griffin in continuing distance education at the University of Vermont.
Sorry about that. That's okay.
Dr. Erin Carr-Jordan. I am the Director of Operations at EdPlus at ASU for Strategic Design and Development.
Hi, I'm Nathan Doctor. I started a company called Qualified, and we're the most effective way to test engineering skills.
Howdy, I'm Luke Tate. I'm Assistant Vice President and Professor of Practice at ASU and at the Urban Institute as well.
Hi, Rex and Nancy Allen. We just spent 2 years in Beirut working with refugees there and in Syria and Iraq, and we're trying to learn how to help them become qualified online to do online work, because that's about their only option. So looking forward to it.
I'm Heather Stevenson. I work for Edelman, a communications and marketing firm.
Kirsten Aspergren, also work for Edelman.
Hi, I'm Matt Sayre. I'm from the University of Vermont, and I create educational programs for the university.
Dulce Vasquez, Director of Strategic Partnerships for ASU.
Hi, Karen Smith, EdPlus Finance.
Stephen Beschloss, Director for Media and Communications at ASU.
I'm Robin Angadi. I'm a math professor at the University of Washington.
Hi, I'm Chris Swanson. I'm the Vice President of Education Week. Education Week's a nonprofit media company that covers all things K-12, and we actually have a specific service called Market Brief, which focuses on the business side of education, which is very relevant to this group at this conference. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mark. I am with Newsella, a differentiated reading platform.
Hi, hello. Hector Núñez, Continuing Education, School of Business, Tec de Monterrey in Mexico.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Johnson. I am a student at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm a director of student and teacher development for a group of schools in Wisconsin.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Jessica Rothenberg-Alami. I'm the CEO of CellEd, where we bring essential skills, literacy, language, and job skills, entry level, to adults with any mobile phone.
Good morning. My name is Jean Garrity. I'm the Director of Professional Development for Leap Innovations in Chicago. Our work is around personalized learning, and I'm interested in exploring ways that personalized learning can further support refugees and newly arrived immigrants.
Hi, I'm Sunita Kikic, Chemonics International's Management Solutions for Development Director.
Hi, Stuart Jones, also at Chemonics International, and I'm working on an online learning and knowledge sharing hub that we're creating called In Depth.
Excellent.
I just walked in. I'm assuming I'm saying who I am and where I'm from.
Yes, sir.
Renee Francois, Director of Higher Education for EdSurge.
Excellent. Thank you all for that introduction. I think that helps frame some of our comments a little bit. I'll just give a very brief overview. Obviously, the panel topic, Education for Humanity, is rather broad. Even the slight description probably didn't give too much context as to exactly what we'd be covering here. In the immediate term, a lot of what we're viewing from the Education for Humanity space is in terms of refugees. Obviously, an enormous issue, timely topic, and an issue that is not going anywhere anytime soon. And so we're really trying to combine forces to kind of assess exactly how we can be the most impactful with the resources that we have and leveraging those strengths. So I know many of you have been very involved in the refugee space before, but to set the context for the conversation, just some quick, as up-to-date as possible statistics from the UN Higher Commission for Refugees, UNHCR. Right now, 65.3 million refugees or displaced persons around the world. That number is increasing. 34,000 individuals are displaced every day. From an educational standpoint, in primary school, 50%, so 1 out of 2 refugee kids are not enrolled in primary school. From a secondary school perspective, which Amanda alluded to before, 1 in 5 is enrolled, so that's 4 out of 5 that are not enrolled in secondary school. And then at the tertiary level, 99 of every 100 refugees is not enrolled in tertiary education. And so if you look at a market need, it's there. Another component that I think is pretty relevant to some of the topics that we're discussing, 86% of refugees are actually hosted in countries that would be considered developing. So from the American perspective, we think about refugees and being resettled. Many times these refugees are simply in countries that are hosting them that are often struggling with their own infrastructure and their own educational ability to meet the needs of their own students. So just some context there. We've got a few questions, but we anticipate this being lively. And if you have questions or comments, always feel free to speak up, and we'll certainly do our best to make this as impactful as possible. So the first question for us, and we'll let Maggie start us off here. How do you assess refugee education needs in general? What are some of the most common or pressing needs and challenges as related to that education? And what are some promising responses?
So I first want to start with the premise that you laid out, which is that most refugees are living in, refugees, displaced persons, there are many different definitions. So I'll just say displaced learners. They're living in countries that are strained themselves. And I think Nick did a good job of summarizing some of the problems there. So what excites me, and especially about the conversations that are happening at ASU and elsewhere, is looking at online space, looking at how you meet their needs digitally. And this is obviously not stating anything you all don't know. This is where we need to move. I think if you don't know the Middle East context, which is where most of the refugees that I'm concerned with are, there is not only an ability to onboard them into existing physical education structures, there is an active resistance to anything online. So major programs that were underway in different UN organizations to try to meet these needs online, which you would think makes some sense if they can't be met in a classroom, the MOEs, the Ministries of Education, oppose. And they've been stopped. Or ones that have started are not able to scale in a way that, you know, we all know needs to happen in order to really address the problem. So the needs are clearly there. There's a problem on the government side. And then there's also, I think, because so many organizations have to work within government rules and regulations, and that makes sense. The UN agencies cannot work outside them. That is where we all should be working, in coming up with ways to attract learners so that you pull them in and they end up pushing the solution. If it works and it does well, and there's lots of complication here, I'm making this more simple than it is, but I am always struck by the Khan Academy approach. Sal Khan didn't ask ministries of education if it was okay if he set it up. He did it, and learners came. And I think that is a really powerful approach.
I would just jump in that I think, sort of extrapolating it more to the East Africa perspective, for example, there's maybe huge linguistic issues that come about. There are challenges to be overcome in countries where, the sort of the main language that could be spoken, knowing that there are 12, 15 languages spoken in many countries, but maybe in a place like Kenya where Kiswahili is the main language that is spoken, and then you have a huge number of Somali refugees that are coming into the country. And in many countries, there's a lot of complication between, well, what is the government going to provide? What does the government say it's going to provide? What do they have the funding and resources to be able to provide? Can they actually have curriculum in 2 separate languages when they're having difficulty, teaching kids to read in their own language? And as you move up the time and education to secondary and tertiary, it gets even more complicated. So I think that really trying to figure out what those students need at those different levels beyond, or that is beyond what the ministries can provide is important, and sort of pushing into this space of who are other providers that can come in and do that in a way. And I think there's a sustainability issue that we haven't quite gotten over yet in many instances, but I think that that's a real important piece of this.
And I'll add that when ASU decided to jump in to this arena based on requests that we received from different foundations that have been thinking about this space, whether it be Open Society Foundation, Ford Foundation, but also other partners like Kepler, a nonprofit in Rwanda that we ultimately ended up working with, we really dove into the literature and realized that you could put the needs into a couple different categories. You could look at content-based needs and identifying if there are specific subject areas, whether it be English language learning, math areas, or workplace readiness skills and others, where content delivery is particularly important. The second bucket you could look at is access to technology, whether it be hardware, software, and related to that, digital literacy. So identifying a space for ASU to assist with the technology component. And then a need for any of this activity to then be credentialed in a way that there's a transferability, or so to speak, that there's a currency of the credentials that learners are using, and that they are transferable from whether it be the camp that they're in or the city that they've moved to, that they could return home with a credential that could then be activated. So again, we started really diving into understanding content needs of the learners, understanding the technology needs of those learners, and then making sure that the time that they were spending was worthwhile so that it could be transferred to a variety of contexts.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting, a couple days ago, I was taking stock of everybody who's in the room, and the universities are definitely here for a reason different than the very few small companies that are actually in the room, right? So the other thing that we are looking towards are, as Jacqueline noted, some private foundations care about this, and they either care about it because they've been directly affected by it. They themselves might have been a refugee and they've made it out and they were successful, or they have family and it worries them. But those are few and far between, and it's very hard to think about counting on foundations to solve a problem that's as massive as this one. But the credentialing one in particular is of strong interest to me. I was in a conversation with Matt Patinsky from Parchment where he approached me and got really excited about what ASU is doing, saying that there's really a very interesting conversation going on about this credentialing. That conversation is certainly very alive at this conference, very alive in our space in America. But the idea of, what is the value of this, and how much does it have to be updated? How quickly do we have to be continuing to update the skill sets of these people with the changes of whether it be the education itself or the competency or knowledge that they need to be as they move into their path of job. So I think it's a very fluid and moving part that we're trying to attack, right? When we think about refugee education, it's always started with, or refugees, we've always started with housing and safety, right? That has been the number one thing. If we can get everybody secure with something over their heads and if they're safe, great, done. Then we move to health. Are they, healthy enough to operate and process? So education's always been this afterthought. When we all know that the numbers of, $1 invested in education is a $53 increase in economic development in any country. I mean, there is data on this all over the place. So the other pieces of literature that I looked at when I entered this project was, what's the common denominator? Education is a common denominator for every economic community in the world. It really is. So we have to focus more on that. And I'm not going to dismiss that you need a house and a good good safety net over your brain. And I don't think that health should be dismissed, but I think that education into itself is its own version of health. So
that's a great segue. So we look at the kind of a suite of challenges that are currently facing refugees, displaced persons. Some are very hierarchy of needs-esque, like you mentioned. Others are a little bit more operational. So when we're looking to try to deploy some of these educational technologies and things like that that are able to provide access to education, what are some sensitivities that we need to keep in mind from the refugee learner perspective when introducing digital technology solutions, and what are some of the strategies that you think should be used to help address those?
Yeah, I'm going to kick that off because of my long storied history in just teaching learning technology. I don't think a lot's changed when it has come to using technology, right? First and foremost, the motivation of somebody to learn always exists within that person's soul, right? If you're not willing to learn, you're not going to. But if you are determined to learn, nothing really will stop you, right? So motivation, with or without technology, kind of is a big core of every message I ever think through. But the other problems are stuff like time management, even when you don't have anything else to do, managing yourself on time, and how long you spend in a particular environment has been a constant challenge with technology. It's why we've been through so many, it's why a clock is sitting in front of us right now, right? If we don't manage our time properly at this conference, we're going to get booted off. The learning curve of using the actual product itself. Some people are just self-motivated learners and they figure it out. I certainly know that in my own home, the learning curve is enormous between the 6-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 18-year-old, the 42-year-old, and the grandfather, right? So the learning curve of the technology itself hasn't changed. And then obviously the access, right? I think this is something we all know. It's a huge disclaimer to say that refugee camps don't have access. They do. They can get online. Whoever's building the mobile platform for everybody, great, because they can get there, right? They might not have a laptop. We all had problems with the laptop. One laptop per child. They got stole, safety, da-da-da. But people are leaving with their phones, and they do have access. So the technology challenges are the dependency on the connection may be sporadic, but that's really no different than if you're at a bad airport, right? So I think those are the sensitivities that we continue to have as we use this. The solutions, which we actually just wrote a pretty extensive grant around, I still believe in blended learning, right? So I see solutions where you bring in a human being, somebody who's coached, and a coach who will teach you on computer literacy, somebody who's going to bring you into the three buckets that Jacqueline mentioned, which, the content side of it. Well, if you don't know how to use the device, the coach should teach you to do that. And then if you don't know how to use the device for the content side of it, the coach should be there. So there is a component of FaceTime that has to start. Then letting somebody fly. Putting that environment, if you have a small group of, say, 20 or 25 people working together in the environments, I know the Rwanda study is great, and I know you all do great work, but starting really small, working with these student populations okay, did you get it? Great, now go off on your own. And then giving them some version of a challenge. So a challenge we can easily give people inside of our environment is, if we've worked with a series of refugees, we can push them into the Global Online Academy and see if they can do it on their own. So we can mark at different milestones somebody's completion and success. This has been a huge, so the guy doing Harvard MOOCs, right? I mean, we know that the MOOC, the completion rate is pretty small. It's even smaller inside of these refugee environments. So you need that constant champion who is there for you. So I'm going to say that the solution isn't an all-based technology solution. I still do believe in the people side of it. But it's in integrating the technology in a way that's really effective.
I would just jump in, I think, to say that we can also design the technology to try to overcome some of those things. And, we've all seen the research that says, which is counterintuitive, but, as you work on a game or something, you actually, once you get closer to achieving the goal, you actually need more reinforcement, not less, which seems like it would be self-reinforcing. I'm gonna complete it. I'm gonna finish it. That's actually not the case. We see that replicated in regular education across the world. People get close to the degree and drop out. Well, how does that happen? You're so close. And so I think that we can design some of that stuff in. The second thing that I would say that is really frustrating for me in sort of diving into any of these spaces is that we often come in with this external idea about what people need, what technology they'll use, and we need to listen. We need to think about these are almost clients of ours that we're trying to serve, and listening to them and understanding what they need, what they're bringing to the table. How do they interact with technology? Because I will tell you, I've seen, middle school kids across the world interact with technology in ways that I couldn't even have dreamed of, whether it's a sort of Nokia brick phone or a smartphone. And there are all kinds of technological solutions to give those people access that we might not even have thought about until you actually see how they interact with the technology in their environments.
Yeah, I'll add on that. So this idea of listening to your learners. So that's why we wanted to work with Kepler, and we started with a small pilot. So Kepler is based in Rwanda, and they've been working with Southern New Hampshire University to deliver their competency-based online bachelor's degrees in refugee camps. And what they did is they trained their on-the-ground staff, the Kepler staff, to use this more of a blended model. So the degree and the content was provided by Southern New Hampshire University, but then Kepler staff was on the ground to serve in that coaching, facilitating, in-person manner. So Kepler came to us and said, we're really happy with what we're doing with Southern New Hampshire University, but they have 3 degree programs, and we'd like to expand our work, and we know that ASU is a growing online degree program. Will you work with us? And so we decided to begin by introducing them to our Global Freshman Academy, and in particular our college algebra course, which is self-paced. Because part of what we anticipate with some of our other degree programs is that our 7.5-week condensed schedule for our online degrees may be difficult, particularly if we have a highly differentiated group of learners. So we began this pilot just a few weeks ago, actually, with this idea of deeply listening to both the learners and the coaches to understand how they interact with our college algebra course, what questions do they have, where do they get hung up, etc. But before we came into this panel, we were having this interesting conversation about the difficulties of running a pilot with 25 with the ambitions of scale. So do you create these really optimal conditions in the pilot, a lot of staff time, a lot of monitoring, and then you say, well, now we have a model. We're ready to go. We have these 25 students. Now we're ready to bring it to scale. And I think this is a really interesting question for all of us to consider when we go through these listening tours and we have focus groups or we're testing our various prototypes. What are the steps that we can take to really verify that we do have a scalable model there? And I think talking to these coaches in particular and really figuring out the way that they've been trained and the way that they can continue to get professional development as the technology evolves is a step in the right direction towards thinking about this issue.
Just to build off that, I also think it's interesting, global Silicon Valley, and the idea of this isn't something I think that we plan out and then implement the grand plan. I mean, this is iterative and mistakes and failure and more mistakes. And I think that that's what we see when we reach small areas of success that you can build upon and that's one of the problems that I see in the international development work that I do, is that we often try to come up with a plan and implement this bigger plan. Well, you need to know where you're going, but sometimes you don't know the road that's going to get there. And I think that that's what we see, and we try to learn from places like Silicon Valley, is how do we iterate and innovate along the process to be able to get to that scalable model faster.
But also remembering that we're serving a client, and that client is the learner and potentially also the educator, or in the non-formal and informal learning space, a facilitator, a guide, a coach. And thinking about that community and letting that always be, and I think this is one thing that we agreed upon in that conversation before the panel, that we all think often gets lost. It's easy to think that you have a solution. It's harder to actually first put that aside and say, what do you need? Right. And where do you want to go? This is a journey. And if we're all committed to the idea of lifelong learning, we want everyone on that journey, and forever, potentially. And while that seems even bigger and grander, maybe than Education for Humanity, if that is the goal, and then you judge the milestones and the markers and the outcomes by the learner and the educator's needs, which may look slightly different in East Africa than they do for a Syrian living in Germany, then what does that mean? And so always saying, I might have something that works, but first let me see what they need.
Maggie wasn't here yesterday when we were told that our Department of Education should be called the Department of Lifelong Learning. So we are, I couldn't agree with you more, because it really is, their lives are on the line, right? So again, going to the population that we're talking about in this room, once they understand what this education can do for them, you'll see the iterative approach of, okay, so this worked for me, maybe it'll work. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer in these environments. When we were working on the Muslim Majority Nation project with Secretary Duncan's office, the research was astounding on how much the peers will help themselves as long as everybody else gets out of the way. So I think that because we don't know the conditions and the environments that these people are living in, and we shouldn't come in with the wonderful American hand saying, I'm willing to help you, right? So it's hand up versus hand out. We should take the skills that we understand as far as ASU's incredible depth of knowledge of developing online technologies. That's one side of it. But us arriving in Rwanda saying, we know what this is like, is a very different story. So the lifelong learning thing is something that I think we are actually committed to as a country, but the definition of lifelong is so different to somebody in a situation in a refugee camp than versus, great, I'm 75 years old and I get to take a new course at the community college now, right? So totally different scenarios. So I feel like, again, that listening to the client and the learner and giving them just the hope that anything is possible. That education, however they get it, we have amazing stories. My Penn student over there will certainly remember this. The Milken Challenge at Penn had this incredible story of a refugee coming out of Africa, getting to MIT, creating the portable cloud. The story is extraordinary, and wanting to replicate that story. There shouldn't be. That's why we can't have the scalability of this. Shouldn't be at the N of one. It should be the N of hundreds of thousands of people, because when you have millions, you have a lot of hope in there for great products and services that they can bring forward to us as well.
And I would only add that I think there's a great foundation of belief within the refugee community of the importance of this, and I'm not going to get the facts and figures right, but it's something like 90% of sort of when you aggregate studies that say that the refugee population believes in education and wants to get there, and if you can give them something that then they see that is relevant, they want to buy in because they see that as a path, and that is just as important as health or other things to them, because they see that as a path out as opposed to just a sort of stasis, as I'm going to stay in this camp and okay, I'm healthy and I have shelter, that's great, but I don't think that that's the goal for any refugee that I've ever spoken to. They want a path out to success, whatever that is for themselves, and so they believe in education.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so going along with that, touching a bit on the scalability component, touching a bit on some of the digital technology component, what, if you have any experience in the past or a philosophy of what helps to ensure quality from distance. So we have a number of online related professionals here, mobile technology, trying to scale at the same time trying to maintain quality. Any guidance on that $1 million question?
Sure, I can jump in. So when ASU really just started jumping into this space, and you heard President Crow speak, and we have these bold ambitions, we knew we needed to start somewhere. And so for us, our first step was identifying the right on-the-ground partner. So working with Kepler, realizing that we could actually explore learning questions with them that would be of mutual interest around the timing of the courses, this model of the coaches, and that we would both have skin in the game. So ASU would offer to convert the courses and pay for the fees. We would send a team to help train some of their folks, so we sent them to Rwanda, and that they would invest their staff time and learn the GFA model and the college algebra model with us. So for me, I think for universities considering this work, the identification of the right on-the-ground partner is a really important step, and one that is willing to really co-create and think boldly about the effort that you want to advance.
I would jump in and say I think that we can actually learn some things from in the United States right now that's happening when we're trying to push out like vocational education online, that we've seen, the idea of trying to push down pyramid, reach people who wouldn't be accessing higher education, and those touch points are really important. We talked a little bit about that coach, but a lot of times that coach is just somebody who online is keeping track and somebody's progress stalls. Do they get that text message, that call, because if you imagine a life that's in flux, it may be they were moved, it may be something happened and then they stopped. And as we all know, habits are hard to form and they're easy to break. And so if you're logging in, that call may be the thing that pushes them over to the next case. And certainly in the US, we've seen that when you're trying to reach disadvantaged populations with things like vocational training, having those touch points, I think, have been able to change people's behavior to persist better. And so how do we build that into this system, I think is important.
Well, and to your point about the design, I used to run the Sailor Academy, which is an open, free online courses developed by a crazy billionaire in Washington named Michael Saylor. We had 70,000 users every month. We got over to 150,000 when I actually put everybody on a path. And the way I put everybody on a path was I got into the data analytics behind where they would get stopped. And then what we would do is we would see a trend and we would say, look, you got stuck here. Oh, so did 60 other people in the same course. And then we would go back to your point of, oh, there's something wrong with that lesson. So we would fix it. And then when we would fix their stopgap, we would get to a point where we could move them into a much better direction. The majority of the people that were taking those courses were coming from something like 82 countries around the world. They were getting a free education, and they loved it. And the minute we would motivate them quietly and just push them along, it was human-centered design thinking, a big staple at ASU, a wonderful part of the culture and the philosophy of that university is they are grounded in human-centric design. And putting the refugee as a human is also very important because they are humans.
So we've actually at QFI not yet implemented any of what we're thinking about. We've spent about 2 years looking at the great work of others, actually, because one of the things that we thought was we may not actually know what we're doing, and this isn't really our space. I said at the beginning we work on Arabic language, and we were brought to this issue by the fact that so many who speak Arabic as a native language are displaced. And so what does that mean, and how do you look at content, and how do you meet their needs? So we kind of came at it from a very different orientation. And one of the things that I kind of always think is that I'm not the first person to have any particular idea. There's probably other people out there that not only had it, but are giving it a shot. And one of the things that we heard as we spent 2 years doing a lot of background research on this was that, one, there are a lot of people doing really interesting things, and you're hearing some of that here. Two, that there's not enough information sharing across regions, across disciplines. It's very understandable given the refugee and humanitarian context that once you get funding and a project, you're in it, you're in the zone, you're doing your thing. And maybe if you came out of another region, you may know something that's happened there. But most people are pretty specialized regionally, unless they get to Emet's exalted position. And so that information sharing doesn't really happen in a natural way. And there are great organizations like the International Network for Education in Emergencies that tries to do that, but they're also hamstringed in many ways. And then there's the organizational rivalries between all the UN agencies, the for-profits, the non-profits. I mean, it is a soup, and it's messy. And in looking at all of this and looking at this great work that was happening, content that was being developed in Lebanon, digital content, because USAID had that $400 million iPad project. No one in Jordan knew about that content. You could just crosswalk the standards and use it in Jordan, but no one even knew it existed. And so we started thinking, wow, there's a role here for someone to try to be a hub, not look with a basic set of standards at whether or not something is delivering or not delivering, and then sharing that information so that others can access it, benefit from it, and connect. And so that's kind of where we are in this. So it's not really on implementation. It's sort of saying, oh, there's this great work happening out there, but one of the really missing pieces is that many people don't know.
Yeah. Well, there seems to be a common thread here that is being expressed in it, and it's something that we're trying to emphasize as well, is approaching this type of a sensitive issue with some humility, right? So I want to do one rapid fire conclusion question and then open it up to make sure that we're allowing for some interaction here. And Emet, we can start with you. If you had some advice to cast for others that are looking to either invest in or embark on a project related to this Education for Humanity space.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm repeating myself, but I think that, I often look at this, and whether it's a for-profit model or not-for-profit model, but really looking at sort of what is your value proposition that you're trying to put forward for that learner or for that client, and really trying to understand what are the gains that they're looking to make and what are the pains that they're feeling, and then when you're bringing a product, whatever it is, to bear is making sure that product actually aligns with it's a pain alleviator or a gain creator for those students. And one of the things that I think that we've been finding out, Chemonics has been finding out as we look into this space, just as an example, is one of the great pains that we see refugees have is the portability of their educational history, for lack of a better term. And so we're really pushing on how can we create, electronic ways of giving them ownership of their data. And you maybe would or would not be surprised at the number of trainings and course offerings and things that refugees are actually given, and people are gaining knowledge. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean anything unless you can prove it to somebody who's going to give you a job or give you a spot in a school or give you. And so what we end up seeing is that these people gather this tremendous amount of knowledge, and they have a lot to offer, but it's not known. And so we're really trying to push on how can we creatively think about ways of giving them ownership, let's say, of a educational passport or educational identity that they can take with them sort of forever and hold on to, and that can be a trusted source for then other people, whether it's universities in the U.S., universities in Europe, but also potentially employers or other folks to really buy into. So, but that we came to that because we were looking at not what does Chemonics want to do. I have a lot of cool stuff that I could come up with that I'd want to do, but what's a pain or a gain that they need to that we think we can address for them.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about Maggie's last comment about the coordination. It's kind of the classic right hand, left hand doesn't know what they're doing, but at a global scale, and it's detrimental. So I think that the lack of coordination, the other thing at the 30,000-foot level we should all be thinking about as universities, as people who do know how to build communities. I mean, that's what we're really good at. Why don't we also take the tool set of online teaching and learning activities and also build communities around them so that the right hand and the left hand in a situation going on miles apart from each other, that the content does get shared. We had this problem all the time during the soft diplomacy days of we're going to avoid the next 9/11 through education, and we just never got it right. I mean, we failed miserably, to be completely honest with you. So we need to figure out the coordination, and I think that there's actually a big part for private industry to play in this. You see the natural places like Qualcomm's and the telecom companies in these major regions, they obviously have an agenda, right? But having an agenda but moving the ball forward is okay. So it's kind of the public-private partnership models that we do well here could actually be applicable. And I'm curious at Chemonics, the way you reach across the aisle, the coordination and the partnerships of nonprofits, universities, and for-profits working together could really move this along further.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we're trying to work with ASU right now specifically on collaborating, but it's interesting because the incentive structures are not aligned well, and you can even push that into the development space and who are the nonprofits or NGOs and contractors that are doing this work. I think that the spaces where we've seen it really work, and we've partnered with telecoms, for example, in Rwanda right now. I believe we're partnering with MTN. We're partnering in DRC with Orange, and they're bringing resources to bear. Now, obviously, they're trying to get users. Like they will give you SIM cards if they think that you're going to spend the data, and so you have to sort of make that calculation of if you're tying somebody into an Orange SIM card, what does that mean? And that's not to downplay it. I think it's great, but what does that mean? I think with universities, it is also complicated, and one of the reasons why we've been excited to work with ASU is that there's not necessarily the same incentive structure within ASU as potentially other universities. Anyone who saw Dr. Crow's talk this morning knows that ASU is operating in a different space and a different philosophy right now from traditional universities, and so trying to figure out where that alignment is, I think, is really important and difficult as well.
Absolutely. I'll add a couple other thoughts. So I think each of us is in this process of like dipping our toes in the water. This is just starting, and after going to GSV now for several years, I've noticed that sessions like this that have maybe a dozen people in the audience, a year from now are then packed. And so this is like the early inclination that people are starting to get interested in this. There are folks that are starting to ask these questions, and then a year from now, we're all going to have results from the projects that we're starting to launch. So I'll just offer some of the hunches that we currently have now that I hope some of you will run with, so that maybe you can be up on the stage a year from now as well. So one is, in addition to thinking about refugee and displaced populations, we also want to be cognizant of the local and peripheral other vulnerable populations that live nearby the camps, that live in the cities and towns where the refugees end up residing, so that we can promote a sharing and advance more accessibility of education while also promoting social cohesion. So in these areas where you find the displaced populations, again, there are many populations of many needs. And so making sure that we are delivering solutions that promote social cohesion and could mitigate resentment of other residents that are absorbing refugee populations. Another is really doing a deep dive on what makes the content motivating to individuals who are experiencing trauma. And I think over the next year, this is an area where we really want to do a deep dive, and we think that we can work very closely with learners and these coaches in order to better understand that. And then finally, I'll go back to Sandy Sugart's point this morning about helping anyone learn anything if given the right conditions. So at this meeting every year, I think there's a lot of talk about the products themselves. But really thinking about the learning conditions and how we can use multi-sector partnerships to create the learning conditions, and how we measure the environment, the learning environment that we're co-creating together is what I would say is an important next step for all of us.
That's great, thank you. I think we've got about 3 minutes. So just want to be super.
I'm jumping in.
Jump in. Yeah, please.
I'm going to jump in. Sorry. That'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to echo something Shannon May, Bridge Academy is not everyone's favorite organization, but I was really struck by her entrepreneurship, her leadership, and her very much vision and goal-oriented, ability to get things done, even if you might disagree with a private school model in poor countries. I'm going to set that aside. But something she said to me and that really stuck was, work with your learners, set the goals, take risks, and don't let anyone stop you. And I thought that, especially for this crowd in particular, that's not a bad thing, but it really does, again, start with the learners. And I think you heard that from all of us.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments? Open to both from the group here. We've got just under 3 minutes.
I have a question for the other universities that are in the room. Are you doing stuff with refugee education, or are you thinking about doing stuff with refugee education?
Short version, yes, but it'll take a while to explain, and I don't know all the details.
Okay. By the way, I love that shirt. It's a great shirt.
So I love your point about that. This is going to be, because I think the world is starting to notice how big of a problem this actually is. I don't know why it took so long, but I do agree with you that this is going to be a very different conversation next year. So.
I would also put out the challenge of what can we learn beyond this, like from this, that we can spin off into other education spaces, because just because you're working with refugees or IDPs doesn't mean that learning can't then be spun off into other areas, whether it's in the developed world or elsewhere.
Agreed.
Sure. First, yeah, we saw him.
General question. So if we think about a refugee population, they're displaced. They've been taken out of the place they live and they're someplace else, maybe internal or maybe in a different country. When you think about providing them with educational support, and as they get older, maybe support to transition into the workplace, let's say, how do you think about preparing them for what system? Is it the place to ultimately maybe go back to the place they came from, the place where they are right now, some other destination? Because they're in betwixt and in between, right? And so we think about, the education we provide here in the United States is to, go on to higher education, go on to a place in the workplace. How do you deal with that challenge with this population?
I'm going to grab this first, because this is exactly what we were thinking about when we started doing our research about 2 years ago. And we call our internal project Build Back Better, in part because it was with an eye to the return. Not everyone will return, most won't return, and the statistics right now, which are about over a decade old, and so don't reflect what's happened since the Arab Spring, are that people are displaced 17 or more years. And that is, again, 10 to 15-year-old data. I think it's much worse. So they may never go back. So it became more of a euphemism for us that if you could look at what we've all agreed, I think certainly outside the session, and you've heard from some of us here, is not a great educational system to start with. So why wouldn't you look at something that if someone did come home or went to any home, that it met their needs? And the digital space gives us a way to do this that doesn't know boundaries, that could look at accreditation in different and unique ways, that can really push barriers, and that's what it's supposed to do. So to your point, we started looking at this. When we started, we looked at it as an idea to bring kids home and to build a system that was better for them when they got there, but doing it now and testing it out. But now, I think, especially now that it's gone on for so long, you meet them where they are.
And I would just add that I think that a lot of times we look at ideas like employability and those kinds of things, but the reality is that in a lot of the spaces that at least Chemonics works, people aren't getting jobs. They're entrepreneurs, whether they call themselves that or not. And so a lot of the idea of meeting learners where they are is, when we worked with youth in Eastleigh, which is it's a district inside Nairobi, Kenya, that is primarily Somali. What they wanted was entrepreneurial skills. They wouldn't have said it that way, but they want to understand how do they acquire the skills to be able to start a small business. Yep. And when I say small, I mean micro. Right. And that's because that gives them the next leg up. Yep. And now that's math, and that's reading, and that's how do you keep track of yourself, and how do you plan, and those kinds of things. And that can be structured in a way that's accredited and will give them something once they have that small business, if they then choose to go back. And we can't control whether or not the government of Kenya is going to allow them to get a high school diploma or a tertiary degree. That may or may not happen. But what we can do is figure out a way to give them those skills, package them in a way that will mean something to someone, but that is useful for them right now. And I think that's the hope, and that's what our goal is to try to figure out.
Well, I think that's all the formal time we have. I think the panel can maybe stick around a couple minutes if you have personal questions. But thank you all for attending. Thank you for your interest. Thank you to the panel for your insights and philosophies. So thank you very much.